Hello. Have you ever imagined that in the history of drug crime in Mexico, there could be a more dangerous and elusive figure than El Chapo Guzman? The main character in this video is a ruthless drug lord who remains untouchable. Operating from the shadows, he is believed to be even more dangerous than El Chapo Guzman and is a direct rival of Guzman in the battle for territory, responsible for the deaths of hundreds of innocent victims. For the USA Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, he is one of the most wanted criminals just after Mayo Zambada, FBI offering a $10 million reward for any information leading to his capture. His gang is heavily armed with firepower on par with the military. He has even shot down a military helicopter when they came to apprehend him. He is the leader of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, CJNG, and goes by the alias El Mencho. This individual is considered by some authorities to be one of the most dangerous criminals in Mexico, coming from a background as ordinary as anyone else. El Mencho was born as Nemesio Ruben Oseguera Cervantes. Although some local legends say he was simply named Ruben, he decided to add the name Nemesio in honor of his beloved godfather. El Mencho is believed to have been born on July 17, 1966 in the village of Aguililla, Michoacan. Like many other drug lords, El Mencho grew up in an extremely poor family, and he and his 5 siblings spent their childhood farming, growing avocados, a common crop in the region. From a young age, El Mencho knew he was meant for greater things. He realized he had a knack for business and did not want to waste time in school, so he dropped out in the 5th grade to focus on growing avocados for a very powerful local family. However, no one could have predicted that this decision would change his life. It turns out that El Mencho's family was heavily involved in growing marijuana, and avocados were merely used to conceal the drugs during transportation. The Valencia family was thriving in the marijuana trade to the extent that they established a cartel named Milenio. With hectares of land dedicated to growing marijuana and opium, the Valencia family controlled the politics of the entire Michoacan region. Soon, they recognized El Mencho's loyalty and assigned him the crucial task of protecting their drug fields. A few years later, he sought a better life for himself and decided to immigrate illegally to California, USA. In the 1980s, to conceal his identity in the USA, he used multiple names and combinations such as Ruben Avila, Jose Lopez Prieto, Miguel Valadez, Carlos Hernandez Mendoza, Roberto Salgado, and others. In 1986, he was arrested by the San Francisco police at the age of 19 for theft and carrying a loaded gun. According to entry records, he crossed the USA-Mexico border several times in the late 1980s under different aliases. Mexican investigators believe that during this period, he was involved in the production and distribution of crystal meth in Redwood City. In 1989, he was arrested again in San Francisco for drug trafficking. He was deported to Mexico a few months later, but re-entered the USA and settled in San Francisco. In September 1992, he was arrested for federal drug offenses in Sacramento, California. According to court records, El Mencho and his brother Abraham went to a bar in San Francisco called Imperial to conduct a heroin transaction for $9,500. Abraham was in charge of the transaction, while El Mencho acted as the lookout. At the time, El Mencho, who was 26, was much younger than Abraham, but was smart enough to recognize that the deal could be a setup by the police. El Mencho told his brother that the people they were dealing with had paid with perfectly stacked dollar bills instead of loose change. By eavesdropping on a conversation, the police heard El Mencho warning his brother never to deal with them again, as they were undercover officers. 3 weeks later, both brothers were arrested by the police. In court, El Mencho insisted on his innocence, claiming he was not involved in the heroin trade, and that the undercover agents had lied about his drug activities. However, the prosecution maintained that both brothers were working together. El Mencho had only a few options left. If he did not plead guilty, his brother Abraham, who had a drug-related criminal record, could face a life sentence. His defense understood that if he opted for a jury trial, the chances of losing were very high, so he decided to plead guilty and protect his brother from a life sentence. In the end, he was sentenced to 5 years and was incarcerated at the Big Spring Correctional Center in Texas, which housed a large number of illegal immigrants. After 3 years, he was released from prison on parole and deported back to Mexico. At the age of 30 in Mexico, he joined the local police force of Cabo Corrientes and Tomatlan in Jalisco. You heard that right. A drug criminal could become a police officer in Mexico. Due to the dangerous nature and low pay of the job, so few people are willing to take it. In the first half of 2019, 235 police officers at the city, state, and federal levels in Mexico were killed, more than double compared to the same period in 2018. Here, El Mencho had a sweet reunion with his old bosses from the Milenio cartel. After a while, he left the police force and joined organized crime as a full-time member of the Milenio cartel to solidify his connections with the group. El Mencho married one of the sisters of the cartel leader, Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia. In this criminal group, El Mencho would become one of the most notorious drug lords in Mexico. When he first joined the Milenio cartel, El Mencho was involved in a hit squad protecting drug lord Armando Valencia Cornelio, known as El Maradona. On August 12, 2003, his boss was arrested by Mexican authorities. Around the same time, the rival gang Los Zetas, with the support of the Gulf Cartel, launched an armed attack against the Milenio cartel in Michoacán. The attack forced the Valencia family into exile in Jalisco. El Mencho moved to the cartel's capital, Guadalajara, along with his father-in-law, José Luis González Valencia, known as El Quini and Caballero Valencia. In Jalisco, El Mencho and the Milenio cartel formed an alliance with the Sinaloa cartel faction, led by Ignacio Nacho Coronel, a high-ranking drug lord and ally of El Chapo Guzman. Under Coronel's guidance, El Mencho and his group managed the drug, financial, and murder operations of the Sinaloa cartel in Colima and Jalisco. On October 28, 2009, the highest-ranking leader of the Milenio cartel, Oscar Orlando Nava Valencia, known as El Lobo, was arrested. 2 months later, Coronel was killed in a shootout with the Mexican military. Following their downfall, the Milenio cartel disintegrated, leading to internal conflicts. The Milenio cartel split into 2 factions. One, La Resistencia, aimed to continue as a subordinate of the Sinaloa cartel for profit, while the other, led by El Mencho and his associates, sought to become independent. El Mencho's view was that it was better to be a rooster's head than a cow's tail. Alliances were possible, but he would no longer be subordinate to anyone. The 2 sides began clashing for control of Jalisco state. Although El Mencho had a little formal education, but he was very savvy in using media to create an image of legitimacy, enhance his influence, and expand his power. He renamed the organization to Jalisco New Generation, CJNG. Whenever he captured members of rival gangs, he would record interrogation videos and post them on social media. The videos showed the detainees confessing their crimes and revealing which gang was backing them. He also made public statements condemning rival gangs, accusing them of kidnapping and extorting businessmen and civilians in Jalisco. When he killed the henchmen of rival gangs and discarded their bodies, he left behind notes saying, "We are the Jalisco generation dedicated to protecting our homeland, opposing kidnapping and extortion. As long as we are here, no one will oppress you." While CJNG did indeed commit these acts, but the deceptive propaganda successfully fooled many people, ultimately helping El Mencho to prevail and take control of the Jalisco cartel. At this time, his arch-nemesis was the Los Zetas cartel, which had split from the Gulf cartel to operate independently with a highly militarized, reckless team. Los Zetas were ruthless and fought on multiple fronts against both the Sinaloa cartel and other gangs for control of drug trafficking routes into the USA. At that time, El Mencho and CJNG were still relatively weak in defending themselves. He allied with the Sinaloa cartel and the Gulf cartel to counter Los Zetas and the Knights Templar cartel, which were trying to encroach on his territory. El Mencho's CJNG quickly grew in power, similar to how El Chapo had done. His rise was partly due to seizing opportunities. In the 1990s, major USA pharmaceutical companies led by Purdue Pharma invested heavily in infiltrating clinics and pharmacies to sell large quantities of oxycodone, fentanyl, and other synthetic opioid painkillers. These drugs were potent, highly addictive, and much cheaper than heroin, dominating the market and making the pharmaceutical companies rich. El Mencho saw an opportunity in fentanyl production, a relatively new field for Mexican drug lords. He not only traded traditional drugs but also imported large quantities of chemicals to synthesize fentanyl, disguising it as legitimate pain medication and smuggling it into the USA to compete with pharmaceutical companies without paying USA taxes, thus increasing his profits. El Mencho turned CJNG into one of the most profitable criminal organizations in Mexico. The government estimates the total assets of El Mencho's cartel to be around $50 billion. This success was also shared with Abigail Gonzalez Valencia, El Mencho's brother-in-law, who led a drug trafficking group called Los Queenies allied with CJNG. In October 2012, a key figure in Los Zetas, Heriberto Lascano, was killed by the Mexican military. After this event, Los Zetas gradually split into smaller factions. Although they continued to use the Z symbol, but they were no longer as powerful as before. CJNG took advantage of the reduced pressure and entered a period of explosive growth with over 100 drug production labs and control over many routes into the USA, generating nearly $15 billion in annual revenue. El Mencho himself accumulated assets worth around $1 billion. El Mencho combined the cunning of old drug cartels with the military might and brutality of newer quasi-military cartels like Los Zetas. On one hand, he bribed corrupt Mexican officials, while on the other hand, he recruited soldiers and bought large quantities of sophisticated weapons from the USA black market. He also placed significant emphasis on using social media to expand his influence and intimidate rival gangs. CJNG transitioned from a small criminal gang to one of the leading crime organizations in Mexico. Their operational strength is concentrated in 8 states: Jalisco, Colima, Guanajuato, Nayarit, and Veracruz, where they tightly control drug trafficking activities. They also operate in Morelos, Guerrero, and Michoacan, where they battle rival drug gangs. From 2014 to 2016, the only area where CJNG lost its presence was Mexico City. Internationally, CJNG is believed to have connections with criminal groups in the USA, other parts of Latin America, Europe, Asia, and Africa. As CJNG grew stronger, conflicts with the Sinaloa cartel emerged. The fragile alliance between the two quickly fell apart, and they began to clash. Despite numerous efforts, El Chapo was unable to stop El Mencho, leading to a series of escalating confrontations. By 2016, in Puerto Vallarta, when El Mencho ordered the kidnapping of 2 of El Chapo Guzman's sons, El Chapo had no choice but to concede and acknowledge CJNG's victory. Interestingly, El Mencho's drive was not for money but for power and complete control. In fact, El Mencho was not known for any mansions or eccentricities. He did not own luxury cars or jewelry, and his only interests were gambling and cockfighting. He was known to bet up to $100,000 on a single cockfight. El Mencho is famous for his secrecy, moving like a shadow, and never drawing attention with flamboyance. People recognized him more for his armored tank-like vehicles when he was in the city. El Mencho preferred to spend large sums on weapons and invest in his army, providing effective protection for himself and his family. Despite his simplicity, but El Mencho was a truly ruthless figure. He followed the philosophy of the notorious drug lord Pablo Escobar, which was that if officials did not accept bribes for favors, he would kill them. El Mencho is implicated in the death of Michoacan's Secretary of Public Security, Martin Godoy Castro, in a plane crash in 2019. El Mencho's ruthlessness was not just talk, he employed extremely brutal methods to eliminate his enemies. He often used fire, ordered beheadings, and recorded videos to broadcast them as if he were a terrorist group. He even dipped victims into acid baths to dissolve their bodies while they were still alive. USA authorities have stated that since 2018, El Mencho's cartel has surpassed El Chapo Guzman's cartel in drug trafficking and has been elevated higher on their priority list. According to these reports, both the Mexican and USA governments have invested millions of dollars in resources to attempt to capture and eliminate El Mencho, but so far, no one has succeeded. On August 25, 2012, a unit of the Mexican Federal Police based in Tonaya, Jalisco, responded to an anonymous tip about an organized crime group operating in a nearby rural community. When security forces arrived in the area, a gunfight erupted between the two sides, resulting in the deaths of 6 CJNG gunmen. Initial reports indicated that El Mencho had been captured during the operation, but the Mexican government later confirmed that he was not detained. Other reports suggest that USA authorities had alerted the Mexican government based on their surveillance of El Mencho's girlfriend, who was involved in methamphetamine trafficking in Gulfport, Mississippi. In a series of closely coordinated tactics to prevent El Mencho's capture, CJNG blocked several highways and roads across the Guadalajara metropolitan area by setting fire to at least 37 vehicles. The purpose of burning the vehicles was to create obstacles, hinder security forces from moving through Jalisco's capital, and give El Mencho enough time to escape. Obstacles were placed on strategic routes to prevent police reinforcements from entering or leaving Guadalajara. After the attacks ended, the government confirmed that El Mencho was in the area and had managed to escape. On March 19, 2015 in Ocotlan, Jalisco, CJNG gunmen ambushed a federal police convoy. The attack resulted in a total of 11 deaths, including 5 police officers, 3 civilians, and 3 CJNG gunmen. This attack was a response by CJNG to protect El Mencho, who was believed to be in the area. On March 23rd, Heriberto Acevedo Cardenas alias El Gringo, one of El Mencho's close associates, was killed in a shootout with federal police in Zacualco de Torres, Jalisco. Sources reported that Acevedo Cardenas had directed CJNG groups in Zacualco, Tlajomulco, Cocula, Tapalpa, Atemajac de Brizuela, and other areas. In response, El Mencho commanded CJNG to carry out attacks on Mexican federal police. On March 30th, CJNG gunmen ambushed a convoy carrying Alejandro Solorio Archiga, Jalisco's security commissioner. Fortunately, no one was killed in this shootout. However, on April 6th, CJNG gunmen blocked a road in San Sebastian del Oeste, Jalisco, using a burning vehicle and opened fire on a convoy of Jalisco State Police, killing 15 officers and injuring 55 others. This was the deadliest attack on Mexican police forces since 2010. On the same day, Miguel Angel Caicedo Vargas, the Zacualco de Torres police chief, was killed by CJNG hitmen. A month later, on May 1st, 2015, the Mexican government launched Operation Jalisco, a military-led campaign against organized crime groups in Jalisco and aimed at capturing their leaders. The announcement followed a series of violent attacks by CJNG in the preceding weeks. On the day the campaign was launched, intelligence reports indicated that El Mencho was in Tonaya, prompting an assault to capture him. As security forces moved into the area where El Mencho was believed to be hiding, a gunfight broke out between law enforcement officials and CJNG gunmen in the small town of Villa Purificación, Jalisco. El Mencho's forces shot down a Mexican military helicopter with a rocket-propelled grenade, killing 9 soldiers. The battle spread across several cities in Jalisco. El Mencho's forces blockaded several roads throughout the Guadalajara area to slow the mobilization of military and police forces, allowing their leader to escape. CJNG set fire to 39 buses, 11 banks, and 16 gas stations, with the attack spreading across 20 different towns and 3 neighboring states. The Mexican government believed El Mencho might be hiding in Jalisco, CJNG's stronghold. They thought he was not staying in one place for long and was moving through various cities in Jalisco, Michoacan, Colima, and Nayarit. He often traversed mountainous and rural terrain, as these areas offered numerous escape routes in case security forces attempted to encircle him. In 2020, the government arrested Ruben Oseguera Gonzalez, alias El Menchito, El Mencho's son, who was quickly extradited to the USA. During the hearing, El Mencho's daughter, Jessica Johanna Oseguera, was also arrested and sentenced to 36 months in prison for drug trafficking. These arrests undoubtedly hurt El Mencho and were seen as desperate attempts by the government to attract the attention of the biggest drug lord. In 2021, when El Mencho's wife, Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia, was arrested, it was discovered that she was the CFO of CJNG. Despite the significant losses and challenges faced by the cartel, they continued to grow robustly. CJNG now controls 28 out of the country's 32 states and has expanded its presence to Europe and Asia. El Mencho has a reward of $10 million from the USA and 30 million pesos from Mexico for information leading to his capture. Strangely, since then, he has vanished from the public eye. Despite many of the cartel's leaders being captured or killed, El Mencho has yet to surface, leading to ongoing speculation about his death. However, neither side has confirmed this, and the cartel's daily operations show no signs of abnormal activity. Influenced by CJNG, many Mexican drug cartels are increasingly adopting militaristic approaches. Unless the issues of corruption and poverty are thoroughly addressed, Mexico's fight against drug trafficking may never see the light at the end of the tunnel. The main character in this story is a drug dealer with one of the highest IQs in the world, a poor young man from Shanghai. At the age of 27, he ventured to Mexico, a place halfway across the globe from his homeland. 10 years later, he became the largest supplier of drug manufacturing materials in Latin America, earning $14 million a day and becoming a billionaire. He was a key member of the Sinaloa cartel, the world's largest drug trafficking organization, dubbed the leader of the Western Hemisphere. He was a close friend of the President of Mexico, an honorary senator of the Mexican Congress, and a VIP at Las Vegas casinos. The Mexican police described him as a typical drug dealer with superior intelligence in the Mexican drug trafficking world. He was known by the nickname Chinese Star, Zhenli Ye Gon. Zhenli Ye Gon was born in 1963 in a slum near the Shijiao Hotel in Shanghai. Unfortunately, he was not the son of high-ranking officials as rumored, but came from a humble family. He grew up near the luxurious life of Shanghai's wealthy and felt envious of them from a young age. He quickly understood the common saying among the people of Shanghai: fortune comes from danger, success comes from the game. To succeed, one not only needs to be careful, but also must be willing to take risks. Little did anyone know that this understanding would later be entirely applied to his criminal path. At the age of 20, with his innate intelligence, he was admitted to the East China University of Political Science and Law. His favorite subjects were law and English. The complex legal rules that others found difficult, he could grasp with ease. The English-Chinese dictionary that others didn't want to open was something he always carried with him to improve his English skills. He became pen pals with 3 international friends, one in Turkey, one in Korea, and a girl in Mexico. At that time, pen paling was the most romantic way for young people to connect. After graduating from the East China University of Political Science and Law, he worked as a salesman for a pharmaceutical company that made cold medicine, but after a few years, he had not achieved anything significant. During that time, the trend of going abroad was very popular, so young people with the means wanted to go abroad to broaden their horizons. He, disillusioned with his current life, also wanted to go abroad. He desired to go to the USA the most, but instead, he received an opportunity that others had passed up: Mexico, and perhaps this was fate. In 1990, at the age of 27, Zhenli traveled to Mexico alone. Every day, he took his business cards to hospitals and pharmacies to promote Chinese-made cold medicine. However, at that time, made in China, products had just begun to appear, and Mexicans rarely heard of Chinese products. They were accustomed to using European and American pharmaceuticals and medical devices, which left Zhenli disappointed in the domestic cold medicine. Yet after a few years of experience abroad, he became familiar with the trade rules between the two countries and developed the idea of starting his own foreign trade business. In Mexico, he met Yu Ziyi, a Chinese-Mexican woman. This girlfriend soon became his lover and then his wife. With his wife's help, Zhenli abandoned his job selling cold medicine and began a business selling clothing and other small items. However, the result was a loss of most of his savings, and just then his wife became pregnant, pushing Zhenli's life into a difficult situation. In the past, Mexico was merely a corridor for drugs flowing from South America into the USA. However, due to corruption and poor management, this country became a place for drug cultivation in the 1990s. At this time, Zhenli suddenly noticed the rapidly growing drug trade in Mexico, and the Shanghai proverb, "Fortune comes from danger," echoed in his mind. Zhenli wondered if there was any tycoon who had achieved a billion-dollar fortune without using illegal tricks and remained completely clean. This thought eventually led him to take a gamble. Zhenli held a dark secret about cold medicine containing ephedrine and pseudoephedrine, substances that have excellent effects in relaxing smooth bronchial muscles and are widely used in cold medicines and cough syrups. The secret is that with a not too complicated chemical process, ephedrine and pseudoephedrine can be transformed into methamphetamine, a synthetic drug commonly known as crystal meth. Zhenli knew that as a foreigner with no roots in Mexico, if he directly produced drugs, he would be destroyed by both the authorities and the underworld. So he wisely avoided the production and retailing of drugs, instead choosing to supply the rare ingredients needed for drug manufacturing. With more than 10 years of experience in the pharmaceutical industry, he knew exactly how to go about this. China, the main producer of ephedrine and pseudoephedrine, became Zhenli's supply source. He established the United Pharmaceuticals Company in Mexico and began importing large quantities of ephedrine and finished cold medicine products from China into the Mexican market, earning his first big money. Although the volume of goods was increasing for Zhenli, it was just enough to live comfortably, but it still wasn't enough to make him wealthy, like the people he had envied as a child. Zhenli strictly adhered to the business principles of the Chinese community, ensuring quality, quantity, and on-time delivery, gradually building his reputation in Mexico. One day, Zhenli unexpectedly received a notice that a customer wanted to meet him. The signature read, Guzman. Yes, it was Guzman, Mexico's #1 drug lord, known as El Chapo. At that time, Guzman was just over 30 years old and had two major ambitions. First, he wanted to become the boss of the Sinaloa cartel in Mexico because he was currently only the third in command. Second, he wanted to lead Sinaloa to become the face of Mexico's drug industry, to move beyond just being a middleman, and to surpass Colombia to become the world's #1 drug empire. However, due to Mexico's geographic location, it wasn't suitable for growing coca plants and thus couldn't produce cocaine. The only drug that could be produced was marijuana, but this was despised in the industry as child's play. To achieve his grand goals, Guzman targeted a new drug that the Colombians looked down upon, methamphetamine. However, he hadn't yet mastered the production technique and often failed. In 1999, Chinese police busted an extremely large pure crystal meth case, making Liu Xiaohua, China's #1 methamphetamine producer, famous worldwide. Guzman immediately sent people to China to find Liu Xiaohua, but his subordinates only brought back 2 jars of Laoganma chili sauce, as gifts knowing that their boss loved spicy food. This might sound humorous, but it was true. Guzman tried the sauce and found it delicious, even going so far as to produce a Mexican version of Laoganma chili sauce, keeping the original name. Of course, the main purpose was to find a way to hide drugs in these jars of chili sauce for transport to the USA and India. Failing to locate Liu Xiaohua left Guzman extremely frustrated. At that moment, his subordinates provided information about another Chinese man, Zhenli Ye Gon. Zhenli was a supplier of ephedrine, a key ingredient for drug manufacturing, with a good reputation in the Mexican business community, though he had yet to achieve significant success. On a dark night, the two met. Zhenli said, "I only supply quality goods and don't get involved in anything else." Guzman replied, "Coincidentally, I only need quality goods. Anyone who gets involved in anything else will die." Thus, the two quickly agreed to work together. From that first meeting, within 5 years, Guzman became the world's #1 drug trafficker, realizing his personal ambitions, while Zhenli became the world's most intelligent supplier of drug-making ingredients, earning $14 million a day. He had become as wealthy as the people he once envied as a child. With his genius, Zhenli revolutionized the traditional method of extracting ephedrine and pseudoephedrine from plants, shifting to chemical synthesis to increase the supply capacity. This completely changed the landscape of drug ingredient supply worldwide. This led to a boom in ephedrine-based drugs for the Sinaloa cartel, gradually dominating the North American market. Moreover, before Zhenli's involvement, ephedrine and pseudoephedrine were mainly used to produce methamphetamine, but after he joined, these substances began to spread to other drugs like MDMA and THC, contributing to massive criminal activity. According to investigations between 2005 and 2006 alone, Zhenli imported 96 tons of ephedrine or pseudoephedrine from China under the guise of cold medicine production. Oddly enough, these 96 tons came with full import documentation, but only the customs declarations from China could be traced, with no records of shipments in Mexico. Mexican police speculate that the shipments were likely seized by Mexican drug gangs en route and needed to be laundered before use. Thus, Zhenli Ye Gon went to Las Vegas, where he spent hundreds of millions of dollars in a single night betting on both sides at prestigious casinos. With just about 5% of the wager amount as a fee, he could completely launder the dirty money and then transfer it through banks to Hong Kong, Mexico, and other places in the USA. To maintain a good relationship with this high roller, the casino even gifted him a Rolls-Royce. The reason he chose casinos to launder money was that casinos are the final stop that law enforcement agencies worldwide monitor to recover money. The fact that banks helped Latin American drug traffickers launder money to earn fees has also been verified, with the USA Senate conducting investigations into this issue. After obtaining clean money, Zhenli bought a large villa next to the presidential palace in Mexico City and returned to his hometown in Shanghai, purchasing Villa Number 16 on Gong Road for what was rumored to be hundreds of millions yuan. He also employed networking strategies in both China and Mexico to deftly manage relationships, nearly bribing the entire Mexican government. Through investments, he even secured the honorary position of senator in the Mexican Congress and the opportunity to obtain Mexican citizenship. Mexico's then president Vicente Fox even personally attended his citizenship ceremony, demonstrating their close relationship. Fluent in the ways of officials, commerce, and the underworld, Zhenli gradually became famous in Mexico. Although he later became the core supplier for the Sinaloa drug cartel, Zhenli always considered himself a businessman, not a drug dealer. Of course, this was merely his way of deceiving himself to seek psychological comfort. Some Mexican officials believed Zhenli's words, but others did not, such as Felipe Calderón, who was elected the youngest president in Mexican history in 2006. Immediately after taking office, Calderón launched a war on drugs, and Zhenli, a foreigner without strong backing, became the first sacrificial lamb in this campaign. In 2007, Zhenli's mansion was seized along with the largest amount of dirty money in the history of the global war on drugs, $205 million. Among the confiscated items were cash wrapped in Las Vegas casino packaging, a white tiger, 28 luxury cars, 200,000 euros, and 18 million Mexican pesos. However, they did not catch Zhenli. The Mexican police issued a global red notice through Interpol. After receiving a request for investigative assistance from Interpol, Chinese police quickly searched Villa No. 16 on Gong Road in Shanghai and thoroughly investigated companies that had business transactions with Zhenli's Mexican pharmaceutical company. The investigation revealed that Zhenli had indeed imported pseudoephedrine from several factories in China and shipped it to Mexico, but he had not violated any Chinese laws. All licenses and certificates met legal requirements, and all production and transportation activities involving pseudoephedrine from the factories were legal. A few months later, Zhenli Ye Gon and his family were arrested at a Chinese restaurant in the USA. Zhenli denied all drug trafficking charges and agreed to an interview with the Associated Press, where he claimed that the money found in his home was dirty money from the election campaign that Mexican drug lords had donated to Calderón. He further claimed that Mexico's health minister, Lozano Alarcón, had forced him to hold on to the money with the threat, cooperate or die. Zhenli also asserted that the amount of money in his house was not just $205 million, but $270 million, along with countless pieces of jewelry, famous paintings and antiques, all of which had been seized by the Mexican government. Zhenli's detailed testimony sent shockwaves around the world, causing many to question the transparency of the Mexican government, especially in a context of rampant corruption. In Mexico, the public even tended to view drug traffickers as Robin Hood figures, heroes of the poor, rather than trust government officials. Zhenli's phrase, "cooperate or die," quickly became a popular catchphrase in Mexico, even being printed on car decals that sold well. The Mexican government, of course, denied all accusations and countered by calling Zhenli a USA spy sent to overthrow the Mexican government, further amplifying his notoriety. This war of words dragged on for 9 years, but Zhenli was eventually extradited back to Mexico and imprisoned in the Altiplano high-security prison, infamous for the escape of drug lord Guzman through a tunnel. Zhenli faced more than 10 charges, including manufacturing and trafficking drugs and possessing illegal weapons. While some might think Calderon was a positive figure in the fight against drugs, the reality was different. He had promised to use the more than $200 million confiscated from Zhenli to build over 300 rehabilitation centers nationwide, but to this day, these centers have yet to materialize. In 2018, the new President López Obrador admitted that even he did not know where the enormous sum of money was, further fueling suspicions that the money was indeed from drug lords for Calderon, and that Zhenli's asset seizure was merely a means to reclaim Calderon's share. The new president, López Obrador, was not resigned. In 2019, he publicly auctioned off Zhenli's mansion, selling it for over $5 million. At times, he said the money would be used to contribute to the national budget, and at other times, he declared it would be used to fund Mexican athletes participating in the Pan American Games. Ultimately, the money was divided among 3 government departments in Mexico. However, whether López's claim of not knowing where the $200 million went is true or not remains an unanswered question. It's noteworthy that in 2006, when Calderon became the youngest president in Mexican history, his electoral opponent, López Obrador, lost by a mere 0.56% margin. López at that time refused to recognize the election results, accused Calderon of voter fraud, and incited public protests, but eventually had to accept defeat. This might explain why López used the Zhenli case to launch an attack on Calderon. After returning to Mexico, Zhenli did not give up. He continuously appealed and meticulously studied Mexican law, hoping to find a loophole that could get him out of prison. Legal research was one of his strengths. Surprisingly, after López took office in 2018, all drug-related charges against Zhenli were dropped, leaving only the charge of illegal possession of firearms. Notably, according to Mexican media reports, on August 17, 2020, Zhenli Ye Gon contracted the coronavirus while in Altiplano prison, a heavily guarded facility. He is currently being held in isolation, and all legal proceedings against him have been suspended. This news surprised many, as no one expected a place like that to experience an outbreak. As of September 2020, it's unclear whether Zhenli had recovered, but he claimed that he was not provided with proper sanitary conditions in prison and was subjected to inhumane physical and mental torture. Zhenli stated that he was harassed, threatened, mistreated, and isolated, making his life in prison extremely miserable. He had repeatedly filed petitions with Mexico's 7th Court, requesting to be transferred to another prison, but all were denied. Many believe this might be the way life is making Zhenli pay for the crimes he committed. He once thought he was clever, but in the end, life adheres to the law of karma. Those who commit crimes will pay for them, or their loved ones will bear the consequences. Recent news indicates that Zhenli's wife, Yu Ji, was sentenced to 15 years in prison on March 30th, 2021. His cousin Ye Yongqing was also sentenced to 25 years. This has led many to wonder if Zhenli himself will be the next to face a heavy sentence. Looking back at the life of Zhenli, one of the smartest figures in the drug trade, it's clear that everything began with the cold medicine that once left him disappointed and sad. It was this very cold medicine that allowed him to build a brilliant career, but it was also what led him down a path of crime, ending his life in a dark prison. On the morning of September 11th, 2001, the sky over New York was clear and vibrant, with not a cloud in sight. Everything was calm until two passenger planes unexpectedly shattered the tranquility by crashing into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. Both buildings collapsed within about 90 minutes of being attacked. Not stopping there, another hijacked plane crashed into the Pentagon, the headquarters of the United States Department of Defense in Washington, causing structural damage and collapse. This was the first attack on USA soil since Japan's surprise attack during World War II, leaving a deep scar on the USA government and its people. White House officials were at a loss not knowing who the perpetrators were, especially as the Taliban immediately declared they had no involvement. However, the government needed to provide an explanation to the public, and so, a month later, the USA president declared a war on terrorism with the goal of eliminating bin Laden. Bin Laden, the most infamous global terrorist and leader of Al-Qaeda, was the son of a wealthy family from Saudi Arabia and was considered one of the richest single men in the world. Born in 1957 into a wealthy construction family in Saudi Arabia, he was the 17th child out of 52 siblings. The large number of siblings was not so much due to his mother, but mainly because of his father's multiple marriages. Bin Laden's father, with his sharp business acumen and loyalty to the Saudi rulers, had close ties with the Saudi royal family. For example, King Faisal bin Abdulaziz even issued a royal decree assigning all future construction projects to the bin Laden family's construction company. This allowed him to monopolize the construction of all mosques and other religious buildings in Saudi Arabia and several other Arab countries. By the 1960s, he had amassed a fortune of over $5 billion, so having more than 20 wives and fathering over 50 children was quite normal. Thanks to his father's efforts, bin Laden naturally became a wealthy young man. After graduating from university, he joined the family business and thrived in the oil and construction sectors, amassing personal wealth worth billions of dollars. This could have been the story of a wealthy young man striving to become a billionaire and proving himself, but bin Laden's life seemed to have much in common with other ruthless figures, as the comfortable life did not satisfy him. In 1979, the Soviet Union launched a war in Afghanistan, resulting in 1 million deaths and 6 million displaced persons. As a fervent believer in Islam, bin Laden strongly opposed the Soviet invasion and decided to join the fight, even willing to temporarily suspend his studies to participate. Bin Laden and his like-minded associates went to Afghanistan and joined the Islamic Jihadist organization to fight against the Soviet Red Army. He lived there for about 10 years until the Soviets withdrew in 1988. It was during this time in 1988 that bin Laden founded Al-Qaeda with the aim of repelling the Soviet invaders. Initially, Al-Qaeda had a good relationship with the USA and Western countries, even receiving a lot of weapons and military equipment because the enemy of my enemy is my friend. However, the relationship between the two sides changed drastically after a while. In 1991, when the Gulf War erupted, which initially was a conflict between the USA and Iraq, Saudi Arabia, as a neighboring country, also grew concerned when the war began. Bin Laden approached the Saudi royal family and suggested, "Don't buy Dongfeng missiles from China anymore. I have the Al-Qaeda organization. Let me handle the defense of the country." However, the Saudi royal family was not lacking in intelligence. They feared that if they entrusted defense responsibilities to Al-Qaeda, Saudi Arabia might one day become an extremist military government. Therefore, they cleverly declined bin Laden's offer. An unexpected situation then occurred. After rejecting bin Laden, the Saudi royal family agreed to let the USA build a military base on their territory. This was unacceptable to bin Laden. He felt that he represented the righteous Muslims, and from the founding of Al-Qaeda, his goal had been to gather the strength of Arabs to resist imperialist invasions. He wondered why the royal family was colluding with the USA military and why foreigners should interfere in the affairs of Muslims. Clearly, according to bin Laden, the USA wanted to impose imperialism on the Islamic country, which was an affront to Islam. As a leading radical Muslim, he was determined to fight against the USA, which eventually led to the events of September 11th. Talking about the September 11th attacks, this act of terrorism was truly severe. Over 2,900 people were killed, and the economic damage was estimated to exceed $200 billion, equivalent to 2% of the USA GDP at that time. At that moment, USAs felt like people who had just broken up with their partners, completely losing their sense of security. Although many USAs owned guns, but this was a terrorist attack using airplanes to crash directly into buildings, an unimaginable situation that no one could defend against. The USA Department of Defense declared this the most serious attack on USA soil in over 200 years of national history, with the number of casualties surpassing the total casualties from the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor during World War II. Immediately after the incident, military forces across the USA were put on the highest alert. When the September 11th events occurred, President George W. Bush was reading a book to children at an elementary school in Florida. His bodyguards arrived and whispered in his ear. Upon hearing the news of the severe terrorist attack, Bush was genuinely confused, silent, and shocked. President Bush tried to remain calm and quickly left the school under the escort of agents to avoid the possibility of another terrorist attack. Immediately after receiving the news of the terrorist attack, President Bush boarded Air Force One and moved between several military bases, eventually landing at Offutt Air Force Base. In a video conference with the CIA director, he was informed that the mastermind behind the attack was almost certainly bin Laden. This was the reason Bush initiated the war in Afghanistan as mentioned earlier, with a firm determination to find bin Laden at any cost, dead or alive. Meanwhile, bin Laden was enjoying a luxurious life as a guest of the Taliban. At that time, the Taliban controlled almost all of Afghanistan following the civil war, and the situation remained unchanged to this day. When bin Laden founded Al-Qaeda a few years earlier, he had become acquainted with Mohammed Omar, the leader of the Taliban, leading to a close relationship. One of Omar's wives was bin Laden's daughter, meaning bin Laden had become Omar's father-in-law. When Bush learned that bin Laden was hiding with the Taliban, he threatened Omar, demanding that he hand over bin Laden or face consequences. However, Omar was not easily intimidated, and of course could not hand over his father-in-law, especially when the father-in-law was carrying a large sum of money. This was indeed a difficult situation, wanting to retain both the person and the money. Realizing that bin Laden would not surrender voluntarily, President Bush declared to the world, "We will not distinguish between terrorists and those who harbor them. They will all be held accountable." Thus, the USA officially deployed troops to Afghanistan under the pretext of fighting terrorism, determined to find bin Laden. However, what the USA did not anticipate was that the search would extend for 10 years. Before the war in Afghanistan began, 7 CIA agents flew to a valley in northeastern Afghanistan to officially cooperate with the Northern Alliance, another armed group in Afghanistan. The Northern Alliance, which had been worried about its inability to defeat the Taliban, saw this as a good opportunity and agreed to cooperate. On October 7, 2001, the USA military, along with the United Kingdom and other forces, including the Northern Alliance troops on the ground, launched attacks on multiple Taliban positions. Just 1 month later, the Taliban was nearly shattered by the power of USA planes, tanks, and artillery. Armed only with AK-47s and bayonets, the Taliban could not withstand the assault. Despite this, bin Laden continued to live well. To taunt the USA, he even sent a videotape to Al Jazeera in which he told USA that he was living comfortably, eating well, and in good health. He even challenged President Bush, warning that more terrorist attacks would follow. Upon viewing the tape, President Bush felt extremely worried and uneasy. To vent his anger, Bush called in the Secretary of Defense and the CIA director and gave them a severe reprimanding. He finally shouted, "Where are your cannons? Bring them out here for me!" Following this, the USA military launched a fierce bombing campaign in Afghanistan. Every day, there was a scheduled bombing and ground troops continuously searched for targets. Although the campaign did not capture bin Laden, it was not entirely futile, as the third highest ranking member of Al-Qaeda was killed. Realizing that the USA military was aggressively hunting for him, bin Laden and his followers fled. So where did bin Laden go? In reality, he had taken refuge in the mountainous region along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border, specifically in a mountainous area known as Tora Bora. This was an ideal hiding place with its winding, complex terrain and numerous caves, making it perfect for guerrilla warfare. Moreover, bin Laden was familiar with the area, having fought against Soviet forces there previously. The USA paid no heed to the terrain advantages that bin Laden relied on, believing that such advantages were insignificant compared to their overwhelming military power. Therefore, USA planes conducted relentless bombing of the area, confident that bin Laden could not escape the mountains. With a better safe than sorry mentality, the USA military spared no expense in bombing suspected caves where bin Laden might be hiding. In addition to conventional weapons, the USA military deployed laser-guided GBU-28 bombs and Paveway 3 missiles, which could penetrate up to 6 meters of concrete or 30 meters of earth before detonating. They also used Tomahawk cruise missiles, known for their high accuracy with an error margin of no more than 10 meters within a 2,000-meter range. The USA military continued these bombings for a month, and under such relentless assault, bin Laden could not endure indefinitely. On December 11th, the USA military learned via radio communication that bin Laden had escaped once again. A week later, bin Laden sent another videotape to Al Jazeera in which he sent warm greetings to those concerned about High, including President Bush and his family. From then on, bin Laden ceased using any communication devices, with all contact with the outside world being through letters. The USA capture operation stalled and no one knew where bin Laden had gone. The USA military had bombs in hand, but did not know where to deploy them. They considered offering a massive reward of $25 million for information leading to his capture, sending spies to infiltrate Al-Qaeda, or monitoring all of Afghanistan, but none of these plans advanced. Occasionally, bin Laden released a few videos to prove he was still alive. He seemed to have vanished from the earth. In 2002, there was a slight shift in the situation. At the Guantanamo Bay prison in Cuba, CIA agents were interrogating an Afghan terrorist. Unable to withstand the torture, the terrorist finally revealed an important piece of information. Bin Laden's alias was Abu Ahmed al-Kuwaiti. Of course, the CIA could not be sure whether this information was true or fabricated. With the attitude of, better to catch the wrong person than to miss the right one, the CIA immediately began investigating. But there were hundreds of people with the name Kuwaiti. It wasn't until 2009 that the CIA identified a person named Kuwaiti living in Abbottabad, northern Pakistan. By this time, President Bush had retired, and it had been 8 years since the September 11th attacks. Although the CIA was not certain if this Kuwaiti was connected to bin Laden, they sent several agents to Abbottabad. After a few weeks of investigation, they discovered that Kuwaiti lived in a large villa in a wealthy area of Abbottabad. This villa was the largest building in the area with 3 floors. Strangely, the villa had no telephone or internet connections, and living with Kuwaiti was a man named Abu Faraj al-Libi. The two men lived very discreetly, rarely going outside, which raised suspicions among the CIA agents. A few weeks later, the agents planned to install cameras on the trees around the house for 24/7 surveillance without being detected. However, just before the installation, Kuwaiti had all the trees around the house cut down. This made the CIA agents both embarrassed and concerned, as if the cameras had been installed, they might have been detected. As a result, the CIA continued to monitor the house with agents on the ground. A few weeks later, a surveillance report was sent to the CIA director. The report indicated that Kuwaiti's family never left household waste, burning all their trash in the yard. Additionally, the walls surrounding the villa were higher than usual, and there was barbed wire fencing. The largest room on the top floor had no windows, and there were many children in the yard, none of whom attended school, which was highly unusual for a high-end neighborhood in Pakistan. The final lines of the report astonished the CIA director. It stated that based on the amount of clothing hung out to dry, it seemed there was a third family living in the villa, and the head of this family was very likely bin Laden. Immediately after, the CIA director rushed to the White House to report to President Obama. Although it was not certain whether bin Laden was actually in the house with the mindset of better safe than sorry, President Obama decided to carry out a major operation to eliminate bin Laden. If successful, this would bring great prestige. If not, there would be no significant loss and the search could continue. Regardless of the outcome, it was an opportunity not to be missed. At 2 p.m. on May 1st, 2011, Obama, along with senior military and government leaders, gathered in the White House Situation Room, their eyes fixed on the large screen in front of them. The actual attack was assigned to the SEAL team to ensure secrecy and prevent information leaks. In this operation, the USA did not coordinate with the local Pakistani authorities. The entire operation was commanded by the CIA. At 11 p.m. local time, 24 SEAL team members, divided into two groups, boarded two Black Hawk helicopters and departed from the USA military base in Afghanistan, flying 300 kilometers to Pakistan. As the first helicopter neared the villa, its tail accidentally hit the fence. However, this did not affect the morale of the team members, as they and the USA people had waited for this day for so long. 20 members from the helicopter made an emergency landing, donned night vision goggles, and stormed the villa. 4 men guarded the front door to prevent bin Laden from escaping. On the first floor of the villa, they shot anyone they encountered. After killing everyone on the first floor, they quickly moved up to the second floor and shot a young man, who was later identified as bin Laden's 23-year-old son. Eventually, they found bin Laden hiding in a room. The SEAL team did not speak, but immediately fired 2 shots from an M4 rifle. One of bin Laden's wives attempted to shield him from the bullets, but the 5.56 mm rounds penetrated her body and killed bin Laden. His body was then airlifted out of Pakistan. When Al-Qaeda forces arrived to assist, the USA team had long since departed, and the damaged helicopter was also destroyed on site. After confirming that the deceased was indeed bin Laden through DNA comparison, the USA decided to bury his body according to Islamic law and customs. Bin Laden's body was washed, wrapped in a white cloth, and prayed over with the help of an Arabic translator. However, to prevent his grave from becoming a shrine for his followers, the USA military decided to perform a sea burial. This thorn in the side of the USA, along with his brutality, bloodshed, and hatred, was finally consigned to the depths of the ocean forever. To some extent, bin Laden was a leader of an ambitious organization. For a long time, he was a warrior who renounced power and wealth to engage in the struggle against imperialist invasion. He once said, "My career needs money, but I do not." However, extremism and religious fanaticism turned his actions from a protective purpose into aggression and terrorism. After bin Laden's death, Al-Qaeda became a purely extremist religious terrorist organization, occupying cities in Yemen and establishing a branch in India. They claimed to be saving Muslims in the region from injustice and oppression, but valued other people's lives as worthless. If bin Laden were alive today, it's uncertain whether he would view this as the realization of his ideals or just a cruel joke. Monzer al-Kassar is considered one of the 3 most notorious arms dealers of all time. He dressed in fashionable suits and bore a respectable appearance, but behind this facade was the power to sustain entire wars. While Victor Bout was known as the Merchant of Death, Monzer al-Kassar had a more elegant nickname, the Prince of Marbella. Yet he had more than one alias. The USA Senate labeled him as one of the world's biggest arms and drug traffickers. The Iraqi government called him a notorious terrorist, and journalists dubbed him the godfather of extremists. So, who is Monzer al-Kassar, and how did he manipulate wars? If you are a fan of crime movies and believe that kingpins must come from a rough background, or have gone through life and death struggles to become ruthless, reality might surprise you. If you read Monzer al-Kassar's background, you might find it hard to believe that he became such a notorious arms dealer. Kassar was born on July 25, 1935 in Al-Nabq, Syria, into a prestigious family. His father was a high-ranking official in the Syrian government under President Hafez al-Assad. having served as Syria's first ambassador to India and later to Canada. Monzer al-Kassar was fluent in 5 languages, held 3 passports, and graduated with a law degree in Rome, Italy. This is the background of the man who would be known as the godfather of extremists. With a prestigious family, excellent education, and financial resources, what led Monzer al-Kassar down the path of crime? Perhaps it was passion, something he mentioned in an interview with journalist Manfred Morin, the author of The Godfather of Terror. After graduating with a law degree in Rome, Italy in 1960, instead of pursuing a legal career, Monzer al-Kassar chose the path of drug trafficking. In 1970, he was arrested in Copenhagen, Denmark for trafficking cannabis, but was not prosecuted. Kassar then moved to England, where he lived in an apartment in Sloane Square, London, and continued dealing not only cannabis, but other drugs as well. However, it wasn't until 2 years later that Kassar truly found his niche in the arms trade, which seemed like a predestined path. In early 1972, a contact in Lebanon, who supplied cannabis and other drugs to Monzer al-Kassar, approached him with a request. Could Kassar help a rebel group in Lebanon purchase some weapons? Kassar began researching the arms market and supply sources through his father's connections, and he agreed to carry out the deal. He subsequently delivered a shipment to the group in Lebanon, including 400 AK-47 rifles, 100 RPG anti-tank weapons, and 200 grenades, which Kassar sourced from Poland through the Black September organization. By 1988, shortly after taking off, a Pan Am passenger plane en route from London to New York crashed over Lockerbie, Scotland. All 243 passengers, 16 crew members, and 11 people on the ground were killed as the wreckage fell on the town of Lockerbie. Most of the passengers and crew were USA citizens. The subsequent investigation revealed that the bomber was Abdelbassat Mohammed Ali al-Makrahi, a Libyan intelligence officer, and that the explosives used to make the bomb were supplied by Kassar. However, due to a lack of evidence, Kassar escaped conviction. After his spectacularly successful deals, Kassar officially entered the black market arms trade and became famous under the nickname the Prince of Marbella. However, governments often referred to him as the godfather of extremists, and they had good reasons for doing so. One of the incidents directly involving Kassar occurred in October 1985 when 4 members of the Palestine Liberation Front hijacked the Italian cruise ship Achille Lauro and took dozens of hostages while it was docked in Egypt. The group demanded that Israel release all members of the Palestine Liberation Organization being held in detention. When Israel refused, the hijackers killed Leon Klinghoffer, a Jewish USA man who was wheelchair-bound after a stroke, and threw his body overboard. After extensive negotiations mediated by Egypt, the 4 members of the Palestine Liberation Front agreed to release the ship and the hostages in exchange for a plane to fly them to Tunis. However, as the plane entered Italian airspace, 2 USA fighter jets intercepted it and forced it to land at the Milan airport in Italy. After being captured and brought to trial, all 4 members confessed that Kassar had supplied the weapons and planned the hijacking. Yet once again, due to a lack of concrete evidence, Kassar was released after nearly a year of detention. Upon hearing this news, Abu Abbas, then the leader of the Palestine Liberation Front, said, "No one can call him an extremist. He is a hero in the eyes of the Arab people. I will not allow anyone to call Kassar an extremist." Continuing in 1986, a French court sentenced Kassar in absentia to 8 years in prison for supplying weapons to the Palestinians to assassinate officials in Europe. However, this sentence was never enforced, as when the world's most notorious arms dealer spoke, no one dared to defy him. During this time, USA President Ronald Reagan gave the green light to secret arms sales to Iran. After the Iran-Iraq War, a USA Congress-approved arms embargo was imposed on Iran, but immediately, $15 million was added to Monzer al-Kassar's account. The funds from these arms sales were then funneled to the Contras, a counter-revolutionary group in Nicaragua, to help rescue USA hostages held in Lebanon. As the arms dealer gained approval, money flowed into Kassar's pockets exponentially, and before he was arrested, he had amassed a fortune of $26 billion by 1980s standards. Adjusted for current inflation, this fortune would be nearly $100 billion, but even that figure may not be the final tally. In 1992, Kassar once again made tens of millions of dollars by selling arms to Croatia, Bosnia, and Somalia in violation of the United Nations Security Council's arms embargo on these three nations. Additionally, Kassar sold weapons to Chad, Guatemala, Iran, Lebanon, Sri Lanka, Syria, and Yemen. To ensure his safety, Kassar contacted former Argentine President Carlos Menem and received a passport proving his Argentine citizenship. Prosecutors at the International Court of Justice in The Hague stated that it was difficult to find Kassar's criminal records in any country. Meanwhile, Kassar nonchalantly declared, "Where there is money, there is me. In business, I have met many interesting people, both good and bad, but how do you know who is good and who is bad? It's just a matter of perspective. Someone who is bad to you may be good to me, so don't call me bad, just because I associate with bad people." Also in that year, luck smiled upon Kassar once again in Spain. Judge Baltasar Garzon, who led the investigation into the extremist activities of the Basque separatist group, found evidence to charge Kassar with supplying arms to the group. However, just before the trial was set to begin, one member of the ETA group in Madrid and three other witnesses who had agreed to provide evidence against Kassar met untimely fates. One person died from a fall from the fourth floor, another was killed in a car accident, and the third mysteriously disappeared. After Iraqi President Saddam Hussein was overthrown, the new Iraqi government issued a red notice for Kassar due to his previous sale of weapons to Saddam Hussein's Republican Guard. However, Kassar showed no fear. On the contrary, he continued selling arms to anti-government forces in Iraq. Muwaffaq al-Rubai, Iraq's national security advisor, called Kassar one of the main financiers of the Iraqi insurgents, and asserted that Iraq had sufficient evidence of his criminal activities. At that time, one of the key figures leading insurgent groups in Iraq was Sabawi Ibrahim al-Hassan Ali Tikriti, Saddam Hussein's cousin. Under Saddam's regime, Sabawi was the commander of Iraq's intelligence agency and a close friend of Kassar. After Saddam's overthrow, Sabawi became the fifth most wanted person on the new Iraqi government's list. In early April 2005, the United Nations ordered the seizure of assets belonging to Sabawi Ibrahim al-Hassan Ali Tikriti and his 6 sons for financing former regime loyalists and insurgent groups to carry out attacks against the Iraqi government and the USA-led coalition. In 2001, the 9/11's terrorist attacks in the USA dramatically altered the country's foreign policy. USA laws were amended to allow the capture of suspects hiding and operating abroad to be brought to trial in federal courts. This paved the way for the USA Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, to plan the capture of Monzer al-Kassar in 2006. Similar to the operation that captured the Merchant of Death Victor Bout, the DEA orchestrated a sting operation codenamed Operation Legacy, carried out by the agency's Special Operations Division under the command of Jim Soils. After connecting with a former member of the Black September organization codenamed Samir, Kassar eventually agreed to meet Samir in Beirut, Lebanon in February 2007. At this meeting, 2 Guatemalans posing as members of the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, FARC, were introduced, claiming to be seeking weapons to fight against USAs in Colombia. After several contacts and negotiations, Kassar agreed to sell FARC 15 shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles, 4,000 grenades, 9,000 AK-47 rifles, and 300 kilograms of C4 explosives. In exchange, FARC would pay Kassar with cocaine worth $15 million. All of these meetings were secretly recorded by the DEA. The DEA then proposed that the fake FARC group persuade Kassar to travel to Romania to receive the cocaine as planned. With the approval of the Romanian government, the DEA intended to arrest Kassar in Bucharest. However, Kassar declined, citing the difficulty of finding transportation and a route to move the cocaine out of Romania. Undeterred, on June 3rd, 2007, the DEA instructed the fake FARC group to convince Kassar to come to Madrid, the capital of Spain. This time he agreed, perhaps because it was where his Marbella castle was located. During a secret meeting at the castle, two undercover agents, Carlos and Luis, equipped with recording devices by the DEA, recorded the conversation. Kassar remained cautious, probing Luis and Carlos's knowledge of the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. Eventually, he agreed to sell them over 12,000 weapons, including surface-to-air missiles. FARC intended to use these missiles to shoot down USA military helicopters. The deal also included Kassar's proposal to supply 1,000 additional weapons, such as bombs and air-to-ground missiles for fighter jets to strengthen the Colombian armed forces, along with explosives and a training package on how to use them. Kassar demanded that the $4.4 million payment for the weapons be made in installments. Once the deal was set, the DEA aimed to arrange the exchange at a location where extraditing him to the USA would be easiest. According to the plan, Luis and Carlos told Kassar that a high-ranking member of the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, FARC, would come to finalize the payment. However, this leader required a face-to-face meeting to ensure that Kassar would honor the deal. Luis and Carlos suggested meeting in Romania, but Kassar refused, feeling uneasy about leaving Spain. Instead, the meeting was arranged at Madrid's international airport, and Kassar agreed, believing the location would allow him to escape quickly if things went wrong. Spanish police, along with DEA agents, positioned themselves throughout the airport, ready for the arrest. However, as soon as Kassar landed at the airport terminal, the DEA agents suddenly lost sight of him. After a few tense minutes, the agents breathed a sigh of relief when they saw Kassar emerge from the airport restroom. The police swiftly moved in, restrained him, and placed him in handcuffs. He was quickly transferred onto a jet arranged by the DEA and flown back to the USA. On November 20th, 2008, Kassar was sentenced by a USA federal court to 30 years in prison and had all of his assets confiscated. He was convicted of charges including smuggling surface-to-air missiles to terrorists, conspiring to kill USA, drug trafficking, and money laundering. Now, 72 years old Kassar is serving his sentence at a federal prison in Marion, Illinois, about 300 miles from Chicago. He is not eligible for parole until 2033, when he will be 88 years old. The once glorious arms-dealing career of Monzer al-Kassar did not end safely like Victor Bout's. As John Travolta's character in Lord of War, portrayed by Nicolas Cage, once said, "I was the right hand of some despicable people who called themselves leaders. While the most notorious arms dealer in the world, my boss, the President of the USA, shipped more weapons in a day than I could in a year. Sometimes hesitant to get involved with guns, but sometimes he needed a free agent like me to supply the forces he couldn't directly. So you call me the devil, but sadly, I'm a useful devil." I once served as the right-hand man to some of the most dreadful people who called themselves leaders, even when I was one of the biggest arms dealers in the world. Your boss, the President of the USA, moves as many weapons in a day as I do in a year. Though sometimes he hesitates, unwilling to get directly involved in the arms trade, sometimes he needs a free agent like me to supply weapons to forces he can't directly support. That's why they call me the devil, but sadly, I'm a devil with a purpose. These are the words of Yuri Orlov, a character in the 2005 film Lord of War. Though he is a fictional character, the film vividly portrays the harsh realities behind criminals like him. You might not know that the movie is based on a real person, Victor Bout, who is widely known as the Merchant of Death. So, who is Victor Bout? On December 25th, 1991, the Soviet Union officially dissolved after 74 years of existence. The collapse of the Soviet Union was not only a cause for celebration in the USA, the West, or the Russian mafia, but it also left behind a strategic treasure trove for criminal organizations. This treasure trove included highly trained, cunning, and deceitful operatives, specifically KGB agents. When the Soviet Union fell, the KGB also disbanded. Thousands of agents suddenly found themselves unemployed, forcing them to seek other ways to make a living. For many, the easiest path was to join or become key partners of mafia gangs, exploiting the vast stockpile of Soviet weapons. During those years, the Soviet Union's arsenal was a massive cash cow waiting to be tapped. Just imagine an arsenal large enough to equip 4.5 million active-duty troops and millions of reservists, and you can grasp its enormity. Selling just a third of these weapons would be enough to make those involved incredibly wealthy, and Victor Bout was no exception. Victor Bout, whose full name is Bout Anatolievich Bout, was born on January 13, 1967, in a village near Dushanbe, Tajikistan, then part of the Soviet Union. From a young age, Bout showed himself to be an intelligent child with a knack for persuading others. After graduating from the Soviet Union's Military Foreign Language Institute in Moscow, where he became fluent in 6 languages including Persian and Esperanto, Bout served in the Soviet military as a translator with the rank of lieutenant. In the 1980s, Bout, a Portuguese speaker, served under a KGB officer named Igor Sechin, who later became Russia's deputy prime minister. Thanks to his quick thinking and adaptability, Bout earned the trust of his superiors and became a negotiator in many of the Soviet Union's arms deals with African nations. In late 1987, Victor Bout left Angola, Africa. Before that, Angola had experienced a civil war involving 3 factions: the People's Movement for the Liberation of Angola, MPLA, the National Union for the Total Independence of Angola, UNITA, and the National Liberation Front of Angola, FNLA. The USA and South Africa supported UNITA and the FNLA, while the MPLA received support only from the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union supplied the MPLA with military equipment such as armored vehicles, aircraft, and ammunition, even deploying Soviet military units to Angola to create a favorable military balance for the MPLA. With this strong support, the MPLA and its military shifted from guerrilla warfare to strategic offensives, taking control of the capital, Luanda, and 3/4 of the territory, forcing UNITA to adopt guerrilla tactics. During his time in Angola, Victor Bout was known as a lieutenant colonel, responsible for operating cargo flights for refueling. When the Soviet Union and the socialist countries disbanded along with the dissolution of the KGB, Victor Bout was discharged. Like many others, he began trading popular goods in Russia at the time, such as jeans, beer, and Coca-Cola. However, it didn't take long for Bout to realize his opportunity when the Soviet Union's stockpiled weapons fell into disarray. Officers and soldiers, who were no longer being paid, were willing to sell anything they had if there was a buyer. With massive stockpiles of weapons scattered across the former Soviet Union's territories, particularly in Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus, this was a vast resource waiting to be exploited. In reality, this was also the path many former KGB agents took after being discharged. They became reputable traders, supplying weapons to the Russian mafia and smuggling them worldwide. For Victor Bout, this venture was even more convenient due to his 10 years of experience delivering Soviet weapons to forces fighting against the USA in Africa. Moving these goods worldwide was as easy as flipping a switch for him. And this was when Victor Bout officially made a name for himself in history as the most successful arms dealer in human history, a true Lord of War. Seeing a vast arsenal of weapons before him, Victor Bout, with his sharp mind, quickly established one of the largest arms trafficking routes at the time. The Soviet Union had disbanded and Russia's economy was almost destroyed under Boris Nikolaevich Yeltsin's era, leaving thousands of Russian pilots unemployed, especially those who had served in the Soviet Air Force. Drawing on his decades of experience as a negotiator, Victor Bout attracted hundreds of outstanding pilots to work for him. Bout developed an aviation network for arms trafficking so large that it rivaled the military scale of many medium-sized nations. Using an Ilyushin Il-76 cargo plane, Bout shifted his business to arms, dealing including tanks, armored vehicles, surface-to-air missiles, Alaska, 47 assault rifles, RPD light machine guns, DSHK 12.7mm heavy machine guns, and RPG anti-tank weapons. Ironically, his first arms deal was selling to the UNITA guerrilla forces, the same group that the People's Movement for the Liberation of Angola, MPLA, had previously defeated. This deal earned Bout a significant profit, but Bout's influence didn't stop at supplying weapons to organizations and forces in major conflicts worldwide. He was also a significant figure in global arms transactions. He sold weapons to Charles Taylor, the Liberian leader, in exchange for diamonds, provided weapons to Colonel Muammar al-Gaddafi in Libya in exchange for oil, and notably during the Syrian civil war, Victor Bout's weapons contributed to the deaths of 150,000 people. The words of Yuri Orlov, the fictional character in the movie Lord of War, that sometimes you need a free agent to supply weapons to forces others can't, became eerily accurate in reality. Victor Bout also made a similar statement, saying, "You may think of me as an arms dealer, taking lives, but the truth is, if I don't do it, someone else will." In a meeting with UN Weapons Inspector Dragomir Karic at a hotel in Congo in 1996, Victor Bout was criticized for his planes carrying weapons to those who used them to violate human rights. Bout coldly replied, "That's strange. The truth is, I only provide logistics." And indeed, he was right. Bout played the role of a logistics provider, but he was the most crucial one. Bout provided weapons to the National Union for the total independence of Angola, UNITA, but by then, they were already weakened and reduced to a minor force. Before that, when UNITA was still strong, the USA played the most significant role in supporting them. In 1995, Bout received a phone call from a Sunni Muslim cleric from the border region between Pakistan and Afghanistan. The caller informed him that the leader of the Taliban, Mullah Omar, wanted to meet with him. Bout knew the Taliban hated him because he had previously supplied weapons to the Afghan government. However, when Mullah Omar officially invited him, Bout realized the Taliban were in desperate need of arms. At that time, the Taliban controlled most of Afghanistan, and Mullah Omar requested Victor Bout to supply 30 tons of weapons to their forces. Bout quickly fulfilled this request, and within just over 2 months with 45 flights, he delivered a large quantity of arms to Afghanistan, playing a crucial role in helping the Taliban capture the capital, Kabul. Ironically, when the Northern Alliance led by Ahmad Shah Massoud was formed with the goal of overthrowing the Taliban, it was Victor Bout who also sold weapons to this force. Similarly, in 2000, Victor Bout and his team, whom he called the Young Guys from Moscow, went to Rwanda, Africa at the invitation of President Paul Kagame to train the country's military on using various weapons, including chemical weapons provided by Bout. Victor Bout once remarked that it was absurd to call him a merchant of death, while other nations, such as the USA, had arms trading companies. What should they be called? He sarcastically suggested that if he was labeled a merchant of death, then those nations should be called the masters of death merchants. This can be seen as a biting commentary by Bout on the USA and its allies, who, according to him, were the ones instigating wars, creating opportunities for people like him to profit. By the age of 30, Victor Bout had become a billionaire with a fleet of 60 transport planes registered in the Central African Republic under the seemingly innocent name Central African Air Transport Company. However, this was merely a front for his arms trading business. When the war between Israel and Hezbollah broke out, USA intelligence discovered that Victor Bout was meeting with several high-ranking Hezbollah leaders in a safe house on the outskirts of Beirut. The meeting's agenda was none other than arms trading, and one of the weapons Bout sold was used to shoot down an Israeli plane. In 2002, Victor Bout's name resurfaced in the headlines, but this time with a different angle related to the media, prompting many nations to take action to eliminate him. A Belgian journalist named Dirk Drawlins presented a report on Bout's activities to the United Nations in 2001. To produce this report, Drawlins tracked Bout to Congo, where he was executing a deal to sell 16,000 AK rifles and over 2 million rounds of ammunition. Dirk Drawlins recalled, "Victor Bout looked like a businessman on a combined business and travel trip." While Drawlins' colleague, photojournalist Wim van Capellen, tried to approach Bout to take a picture, one of Bout's bodyguards suddenly appeared and made a throat-slitting gesture, implying they would be in danger if they attempted to photograph Bout. It was no surprise when Victor Bout flatly denied and dismissed the United Nations accusations, asserting that he was merely a businessman with many airplanes and had no concern for the cargo his clients hired him to transport, as it was not his responsibility. However, Dirk Drahlen's report sparked a media frenzy. According to Peter Landesman and Dirk Drahlen's co-authors of the book Merchant of Death, after the horrific events of 2001 in New York, stopping the black market arms trade became an urgent issue for many countries. Under pressure from the USA government, Rwanda and the Central African Republic severed all ties with Victor Bout. At the request of the British government, the Central African Republic also decided to shut down Bout's airline. From that point on, Victor Bout, a self-made businessman, officially became a target of the USA and was deemed an extremely dangerous criminal who needed to be apprehended. To arrest Victor Bout, it was crucial to prove that he was a black market arms dealer rather than just a broker or a hired transporter. In early 2007, after meticulous preparation, the USA Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, used an undercover agent to approach Victor Bout. The agent posed as a South African lawyer and proposed that Bout supply a shipment of weapons to FARC, an armed organization in Colombia, in exchange for a large quantity of illegal drugs. Victor Bout was very enthusiastic about this proposal and agreed to meet at a hotel in Thailand to discuss the details. This discussion was secretly recorded over nearly a year, involving dozens of meetings from Bangkok to Copenhagen, Curaçao, and Bulgaria. During these meetings, Bout and the lawyer discussed the time, location of delivery, types of weapons, quantities, and payment methods. Finally, when enough evidence had been gathered showing that Victor Bout had committed to supplying FARC with 6,000 guns, including submachine guns, light machine guns, heavy machine guns, millions of rounds of ammunition, tens of thousands of grenades, and 100 shoulder-fired missiles to shoot down aircraft, all to be parachuted into FARC-controlled territory, Bout was arrested. This marked the end of his arms-dealing career and made him a target for prosecution by multiple countries. In late March 2008, the USA government requested that the Royal Thai Police urgently arrest Victor Bout and extradite him to the USA under the extradition agreement between the two countries. However, Russia objected, arguing that the Thai court's decision to allow extradition was politically motivated and warned that some USA officials would be denied entry visas to Russia. In 2010, the USA federal court held a trial for Victor Bout on charges of smuggling weapons to the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, FARC, with the intent of using these weapons against USA citizens and officials who were assisting the Colombian government in its fight against illegal drugs. On April 5, 2012, during the trial, Victor Bout rejected the prosecution's arguments, asserting that if those standards were applied, all USA arms trading companies should be treated the same as him. Victor Bout's lawyer also argued that his client never stated that he was selling weapons to kill Americans. It was merely a FARC member who said that to him. It seemed this would be the end of the Merchant of Death's journey, but the Russians did everything they could to bring him back to the country. Russia consistently declared Victor Bout innocent, viewing the case as a blatant injustice and continually sought to free its citizen. According to the website of the USA Federal Bureau of Prisons, Victor Bout, now 55 years old, was supposed to serve his sentence until August 2029. However, Bout told The New Yorker that although they wanted to keep him imprisoned for life, he would return to Russia. He didn't know when, but he still felt young and full of hope. Russia had been striving to bring Victor Bout back to the country since he was convicted in New York on 4 charges, including conspiracy to kill USA citizens. More than a decade later, Victor Bout was released, even though he had served less than half of his sentence. On December 8, 2022, the 55-year-old arms dealer was exchanged in a prisoner swap for USA basketball star Brittany Griner, who had been detained in Russia for 10 months. Many journalists called this a losing deal for the USA. So what made Victor Bout so valuable to Moscow that they spent a decade trying to secure his freedom? Although Bout claimed to be just an innocent pilot and businessman, many experts believe he was highly useful to Russian intelligence. However, Bout denied any connection with the Russian government, insisting that he had no secret information about the Russian state and was not involved with any leaders. There have been allegations that Victor Bout was an asset of Russian intelligence, supplying weapons worldwide to serve Moscow's geopolitical goals. Some even suggest that he served the military and high-ranking officials close to President Vladimir Putin. This speculation partly arises from the fact that both Bout and Putin were former KGB agents. If this wasn't the reason the USA spent so much time and money to detain Victor Bout, we may never know the full truth. But one thing is certain. Victor Bout is a mysterious, complex figure who holds significant importance to Russia's intelligence elite and national pride. Interestingly, soon after returning to Russia, Victor Bout joined the Liberal Democratic Party of Russia, a nationalist political party. His membership was announced at the party's annual conference in Moscow, held from December 11th to 13. Bout's public support for the Kremlin, along with his notoriety, has fueled speculation that he might be considering a political career, potentially even running for the Russian parliament. Victor Bout's journey to becoming the Merchant of Death is filled with intrigue and unanswered questions. While much about him remains a mystery, Bout has demonstrated that sometimes those who call for peace are the ones with blood on their hands. Before the rise of the South USA and Afghan drug lords who divided the global drug market, the stories of drug emperors were once a domestic affair among the crime bosses of the Golden Triangle in Southeast Asia. But have you ever wondered how these individuals managed to spread their drugs across the world, spreading the White Death? The answer lies in this photo. The person you're looking at is Frank Lucas, one of the most successful drug lords in the history of crime. He was so notorious that Hollywood even made a film about his life, titled USA Gangster. Frank Lucas was the bridge that connected the drugs from the Golden Triangle to the rest of the world, and the way he did it was considered unprecedented. So, what did he do? Let's find out through this video. The film USA Gangster is a successful portrayal of the life of Frank Lucas, the kingpin of a drug empire that once dominated the USA market, particularly Harlem and the entire country during the 1960s and 1970s. From a poor, uneducated black man, Frank Lucas rose to build an empire that was previously only controlled by Italian mafia organizations. In reality, Frank Lucas wasn't as handsome, suave, or calm as Denzel Washington portrayed him on screen. In truth, Frank was a burly black man with curly hair, thick lips, and a bulky frame that only grew larger with age. Born in 1930 in California, from the moment he took his first breath, Frank Lucas's life was destined to be the plot of a villain in a crime film. Like his counterparts in Southeast Asia or Pablo Escobar in Colombia, the impoverished life of an immigrant black boy didn't offer Frank Lucas any chance to rise through education. Instead, from a young age, Frank was surrounded by violent images, with the victims often being black USAs like himself. At the age of 6, Frank witnessed his 12-year-old cousin being threatened by a police officer who shoved a gun into his mouth, breaking his front teeth. By the age of 12, Frank was already familiar with the racial violence inflicted by the Ku Klux Klan. He harbored a burning desire to change his life by making as much money as possible to gain the power he longed for. In 1946, Frank Lucas left the muddy fields of North Carolina for New York, carrying with him the dream of becoming wealthy. However, with no opportunity for high society to welcome him, he quickly got caught up in the whirlpool of New York's slums. By 1963, he was taken in by Ellsworth "Bumpy" Johnson, a notorious drug lord who had just been released from prison as his personal driver and bodyguard. During the years working for Johnson, Frank Lucas rarely spoke, but his eyes and ears were always wide open, absorbing every trick and connection in the street drug trade. The turning point in Frank Lucas's life came in 1968, when Bumpy Johnson unexpectedly died of a heart attack while dining at a restaurant. Not wanting to be left without a master or to serve another, Frank Lucas decided to use all the capital and experience he had learned from Johnson to build his own drug empire. He recruited his 5 younger brothers and a slew of other relatives from back home to New York to form a vast retail drug network, covering dozens of poor streets in the suburbs of New York, all under the guise of laundromats, auto repair shops, and grocery stores. Very quickly, Frank realized that the retail drug cartels, whether Italian mafia or black gangsters, had one thing in common: insatiable greed. They often tried to maximize their profits by raising drug prices to the highest levels while diluting the purity of the drugs to a minimum to increase their competitive advantage. Frank decided to do the opposite by selling the purest drugs at the lowest possible price. To achieve this, he needed a plentiful supply, buying directly from the source and selling directly to the consumer, cutting out the middlemen. With this in mind, by 1969, Frank began spending time traveling extensively, even venturing to Bangkok, Thailand, to purchase drugs directly from the source. His regular stop in Bangkok was Jack's USA Star Bar, a club frequently visited by many African USA soldiers. Through Luechi Ruliwat, a Chinese Thai bar owner, Frank was able to connect with a Teochew Chinese drug lord nicknamed 007, from whom he ordered drugs to be shipped back to the USA. 007 was originally an officer of the Kuomintang, KMT, who fled to Myanmar after the KMT was driven out of mainland China by the Communist Party in October 1949. He later drifted to northeastern Thailand and became a drug lord in the Golden Triangle region. The supply of drugs from 007 was virtually limitless, but transporting it to the USA was a major challenge. As a result, for a long time, Frank Lucas could only purchase small amounts, just enough to distribute to his subordinates, mostly his cousins, who were managed by his 5 younger brothers and sold the drugs on the streets of New York. The saying, "Fortune favors the bold," seems fitting in the criminal world, and Frank Lucas's boldness extended not just to New York, but all the way to Bangkok. As you may know, before the rise of Islamic militants and 20th century cowboys in Latin USA who created their own drug havens, the world had only one true drug haven, the Golden Triangle. During the 1960s and 70s, the Golden Triangle supplied up to 60% of the world's drugs. As mentioned at the beginning of the video, Frank Lucas was the key link that connected drugs from the Golden Triangle to the rest of the world. So, if you were a crime lord, how would you transport them to ensure maximum safety? Shipping them by train? Not bad, but not good enough. Digging tunnels across the border? That's an option, but it's just a small-time method. Frank Lucas will show you what real magic looks like when the drugs are right in front of you, but you don't even notice. The Vietnam War deeply divided USA society with nearly 60,000 soldiers killed there, especially after the Tet Offensive in 1968. You might be wondering, what does the Vietnam War have to do with Lucas? In fact, it has a lot to do with him. This was a crucial element in Lucas's magic trick. In cultural beliefs from east to west, the dead need to be buried in their homeland no matter where they die. For USA, it was no exception. The flights carrying the bodies of soldiers back to their families were always filled with tears, grief, and loss. But for Lucas, these flights were the perfect cover for his drug shipments. At this point, you can probably guess how he smuggled the drugs around the world, right? That's correct. Through the coffins of USA soldiers killed in Vietnam. Frank Lucas's career as a drug lord took a dramatic turn in 1972. During a trip to Bangkok, Lucas stopped by Jack's USA Star Bar, a place he often visited during his heroin buying trips in Thailand. At this bar, Lucas happened to meet a fellow USA Leslie Ike Atkinson, who was married to one of his cousins. Atkinson was a former sergeant and chef in the USA Army and a co-owner of the bar. When Lucas asked Atkinson for help in obtaining a visa, Atkinson was eager to assist and took Lucas to the Thai embassy in Washington, D.C. During their conversation along the way, Atkinson boasted that there wasn't a single African USA soldier in Vietnam or Thailand that he didn't know. He also hinted at his ambition to become a billionaire, revealing that he had connections with drug trafficking networks within the military. And if you're wondering how Atkinson came to have these connections, the answer lies in the fact that the Vietnam War created the largest drug-addicted army in USA history. It wasn't Frank Lucas or Pablo Escobar, but the USA government itself that created this massive army of addicts. In 1971, the USA House of Representatives published a special report showing that from 1966 to 1969, the USA Armed Forces consumed a total of 225 million stimulant pills, primarily dexedrine, a drug derived from amphetamines. During this period, the average USA soldier consumed 21.1 dexedrine pills annually, with the Air Force consuming 17.5 pills, and the Army 13.8 pills per soldier each year. According to Dr. Kamiensky's research, 3.2% of USA soldiers were addicted to amphetamines before being deployed to Vietnam, but just 1 year later, this rate had risen to 5.2%. A 1971 investigation by the USA House of Representatives revealed that approximately 70% of USA soldiers who served in Vietnam had used drugs. To give you a clearer picture, around 6.6 million USA soldiers served in Vietnam, of which 4.6 million had used drugs. Among them, 15% were heavily addicted, amounting to about 693,000 USA soldiers struggling with addiction. And nothing could be more convenient than having a local drug supply from the Golden Triangle with a transit point at air bases in Thailand. All they needed was the means and someone daring enough to transport them to South Vietnam. This became relatively simple because with money, anything can be bought, and thus a drug trafficking network was established with Atkinson becoming a key figure in this operation. Returning to the main story, trusting his brother-in-law Frank Lucas, Atkinson did not hesitate to boast that he had access to 28 replicas of the various coffins used to transport the bodies of USA soldiers killed in Vietnam back to the USA through Bangkok. When Lucas proposed a partnership, Atkinson immediately agreed. For the first deal, Frank Lucas purchased 100 kilograms of drugs from 007 at $4,000 per kilogram at Jack's USA Star Bar. The drugs were divided into smaller portions, with each kilogram packed into 4 packages. The flights carrying the bodies of USA soldiers from Vietnam would stop over in Bangkok, where the coffins would be swapped with the replicas. The coffins were modified with double bottoms, and the drugs were stashed in the space between the 2 bottoms, then sealed with screws. The official paperwork for transporting the bodies, which Atkinson had cleverly forged with the help of officials at air bases in Vietnam, ensured that the coffins containing the drugs would not be inspected. These coffins would be transported directly to Fort Bragg Air Force Base, and on the way from the base to the cemetery, usually at night, they would have a very brief stopover at distribution points arranged by Frank Lucas. There, the drugs would be unpacked and then distributed through the system down to the streets of USA. Each 250-gram package of drugs was sold by Lucas to retail dealers for $25,000 per package, equivalent to $100,000 per kilogram, yielding a profit of $96,000 per kilogram. For many years, the drug smuggling operations using coffins, orchestrated by Frank Lucas and Atkinson, ran smoothly. Atkinson was clever in only placing drugs in large, heavy coffins and never in those of smaller, lighter USA soldiers, ensuring that the slight increase in weight of the coffins did not arouse suspicion. On average, each coffin could conceal between 6 to 8 kilograms of drugs, with each kilogram divided into 4 smaller packages. The volume of orders and the quantity of drugs per shipment continuously increased, and the Bangkok-based drug operation could no longer handle the task of faking coffins. To address this issue, Atkinson hired a talented carpenter named Leon from North Carolina to Bangkok to create double-bottom coffins. Leon knew that the coffin replicas were meant to aid Atkinson and Frank Lucas in smuggling, but he was unaware that the cargo being transported was heroin. Nevertheless, Leon was handsomely paid for his work. In the USA, drugs with 99% purity were processed by a team of 10 to 12 women who cut and mixed the substance with 60% cutting agent, primarily quinine, to create a product called Blue Magic, which was distributed to dealers. This product was then distributed to dealers before reaching the users. The drugs were cut and mixed with cutting agents multiple times, so by the time it reached the users, the purity was only about 10 to 12%. Despite this, the actual price ranged from $300,000 to $500,000 per kilogram, which was still much cheaper and of significantly better quality than other retail drugs from different sources. Before long, Blue Magic quickly became a highly sought-after brand among drug addicts and street dealers. Even renowned drug trafficking organizations in New York, such as Nicky Barnes' crew and Dominic Catano's Italian mafia family, had to partner with the Lucas family for supply. Naturally, once the drugs were received, further processing and cutting continued, so that by the time they reached the users, the purity in each package was around 3%. To protect the Blue Magic brand, the Lucas family had to carry out a series of brutal purges against both partners and competitors. At the same time, the Lucas family faced numerous attacks from other gangs trying to eliminate them as rivals. Frank Lucas explained that to get rich, they had to keep their product prices lower than competing dealers. On the other hand, to sell more drugs, they needed to ensure a high purity supply so users could get more use out of the drugs. Other dealers often mixed too much, causing users to overdose faster. Soon, Blue Magic became an irreplaceable brand, generating Frank Lucas substantial revenue of no less than $1 million per day. Lucas moved his entire family to New Jersey, bought a large farm of over 2,000 acres with more than 300 cattle for his mother to retire on, and also purchased homes for his siblings. Within his family, Frank Lucas built a comprehensive and solid empire. Lucas personally owned several rental buildings in Detroit, along with numerous expensive apartments in Los Angeles, Miami, New York, and even Puerto Rico, his wife Juliana Ferreit's hometown. Additionally, Frank Lucas had tens of millions of dollars deposited in various bank accounts in the Cayman Islands. By this time, Lucas's assets were estimated to be up to $52 billion, a colossal amount rivaling today's major real estate and tech conglomerates. The money earned from drug dealing was invested by Lucas in restaurants, bars, dance clubs, and real estate. To garner further support from the community, Lucas also distributed food to the poor in Harlem, similar to how Escobar did later on. Frank Lucas also engaged in Robin Hood-like activities, helping the community as a way to boost public support. As the age-old story goes, every empire, no matter how prosperous, eventually faces decline. Frank Lucas's empire was no exception. Stay tuned for the next video to find out how this drug lord's empire collapsed. In the previous video, we explored Frank Lucas's journey from an unknown figure to a powerful drug lord. Fairly speaking, without the support of American soldiers and the USA government, individuals like Frank Lucas would not have had the opportunity to do business. Experts often suggest that the Vietnam War altered the global landscape, including the underworld. The collapse of the drug empire was not an end, but the beginning of a new empire. So how did Frank Lucas's empire collapse? Lucas's empire was born out of the Vietnam War and thrived thanks to USA intervention. However, after the Tet Offensive in 1968, USA resolve for the war had drastically waned. They began withdrawing troops from Vietnam and understandably did not want addicted soldiers to become a burden on a society already strained by the war's conflicts and debts. Thus, the largest drug rehabilitation campaign in USA history, named Golden Flow, was launched. This campaign not only took place in Vietnam, but also extended to the USA, with the government determined to eradicate drug lords, including Frank Lucas. To manage the drug distribution system, Lucas established his headquarters at 933 Sheffield Avenue in Teaneck, New Jersey. This was not only his residence, but also the center for overseeing the expanding drug flow. From the sources provided by Lucas gangster families, such as Nicky Barnes and Dominic Catano, set up drug distribution networks across New York, North American, and even into Canada. Meanwhile, Lucas, the primary supplier, also built his own retail system, managing at least 44 streets in New York, almost all of Manhattan, the entire New Jersey region, and North Carolina. Notably, the entire system, from the recipients, women packing the drugs, to the street dealers, consisted of Lucas's close associates and relatives. He did not trust outsiders, only believing in family members whom he thought would not steal, betray, or tarnish the brand. Lucas also made sure to bribe the public system, renting dozens of locker boxes at the central New Jersey train station. Each box had 2 keys, one kept by Lucas and the other distributed to dozens of police officers or public officials from low to high ranks. Weekly or monthly bribes would be deposited into the lockers, awaiting corrupt officials to collect them in order to secure the public system's indifference and protect his drug empire. Despite being meticulous and implementing numerous precautions, Frank Lucas's drug empire did not escape the attention of Richard "Richie" Roberts, a dedicated and resolute inspector from the New Jersey Drug Enforcement Administration. The Blue Magic brand came under Roberts's scrutiny as soon as it appeared. Roberts gained fame after turning in an unclaimed briefcase containing $1 million in cash with no documentation, obtained from a car search after its owner had fled. Roberts noticed that despite arresting or eliminating many drug lords, but the amount of drugs on the streets did not decrease. This indicated a stable and ample supply of drugs being funneled into New Jersey, where he was assigned. Therefore, he decided not to rush into arresting street-level dealers, but to track down the primary suppliers. Frank Lucas's secretive and cautious habits were not fully inherited by his wife, Juliana Ferre, a beauty from Puerto Rico. Enchanted by the luxurious lifestyle, Juliana bought Lucas a $15,000 mink coat and a matching $40,000 hat. She insisted that Lucas wear the expensive outfit when going out with her. While monitoring some Italian mafia figures at the historic boxing match between Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier, Roberts was drawn to Frank Lucas's expensive mink coat. This intrigued him because the man wearing the luxurious coat was not a well-known millionaire, and the elegant wife beside him was not a famous celebrity. Moreover, this couple had secured the best seats in the stands, right next to the governor and senators, while the powerful mafia bosses Roberts was observing were seated in much less prominent positions. This led Roberts to question, who is this unknown millionaire? As he expanded his investigation, Roberts discovered that Frank Lucas was not known in high society and was not the owner of a major production company. However, the vast wealth Lucas possessed, along with his complex family network, was entirely disproportionate to his background and profession. From that moment, Frank Lucas officially came under Richie Roberts' scrutiny. For over 3 years, even though Roberts had identified Frank Lucas as the mastermind and operator of the Blue Magic drug distribution network, he had yet to find concrete evidence to arrest the drug lord. Moreover, his investigation was continually obstructed from multiple levels, including within the anti-drug unit itself, with some members unhappy about Roberts' inquiry. Every time Roberts was on the verge of obtaining evidence, Frank Lucas always seemed one step ahead, creating alibis to evade legal scrutiny. Both Lucas and Roberts were acutely aware of each other, knowing who the other was and what they were trying to achieve. In early January 1975, as the fighting in South Vietnam marked the complete collapse of the USA-backed South Vietnamese government, this news was constantly updated by the media, signaling bad news for the criminal world, particularly for Frank Lucas. Even though he knew he was being closely watched, Lucas recklessly decided to fly to Thailand for one last shipment, hoping to make a profit because he knew he would have to end his drug trafficking career. During the days when the jungles of South Vietnam were shaking with the Liberation Army's battles, it was almost a race for Lucas. All the resources that the drug lord 007 and bar owner Luechi Ruliwat had collected from the Golden Triangle region were to be handed over to Frank Lucas, despite warnings that he should withdraw before it was too late. Leaving did not mean running away, but Lucas remained determined and went into the Golden Triangle himself to oversee the collection of the enormous order of 2,000 kilograms of drugs. Greed is easily contagious. Leslie Ike Atkinson, a partner of Lucas, decided to take advantage of the situation for personal gain. He chose not to send the $3 million shipment in coffins as originally planned, but to mix it with the personal belongings of deceased soldiers being sent back to USA for their families. As soon as Frank Lucas left the USA for Thailand, Richie Roberts quickly discovered this. He promptly arrested a Lucas associate who was both a close friend and a trusted dealer of the drug lord. By threatening and persuading him, Roberts forced the associate to reveal Lucas's detailed plan. All activities, calls, and movements of both Atkinson and Lucas were closely monitored. Thanks to this, Roberts obtained the flight number that would transport the drug shipment from Thailand to Fort Bragg, with the flight number coded into license plate numbers in the phone calls. Roberts's operation nearly failed, threatening his entire anti-drug career. The drug problem within the USA military had long been flagged, with the media continuously exposing and criticizing the military for initially denying involvement in international drug trafficking. Roberts's request to search the coffins at the military base faced strong opposition from the military on humanitarian grounds, arguing that no one should disturb coffins or disrespect fallen soldiers. Although Roberts eventually won the right to conduct the search, but he found only dead bodies and no drugs in the coffins. Given the enormous quantity of drugs and the fact that each double-bottomed coffin could hold only a small amount, Atkinson decided to take a risk by using real coffins instead. These coffins contained only the drugs, with no bodies, and the last-minute change in the transport plan caught Richie Roberts by surprise, leaving him unable to respond in time. His investigation was at risk of being closed indefinitely. While Atkinson and Lucas's change of plan inadvertently avoided detection by Roberts, Atkinson's greed unintentionally led to his downfall. Atkinson packed his own shipment into 2 bags, labeling the recipients as 2 elderly African USA women in Fayetteville, North Carolina. In his haste, Atkinson mistakenly wrote the wrong address on one of the bags. The woman receiving the shipment realized, even without opening it, that the package had been delivered to the wrong address. Suspecting it might contain a bomb, so she turned it over to the police. When the police discovered the drugs inside, they handed it over to the anti-drug unit. It didn't take long for forensic experts to find Atkinson's fingerprints on the package and track down and seize the second bag. On January 19, 1975, Atkinson was arrested, and Roberts regained the right to investigate, which had seemed completely dismissed. Unlike what is depicted on screen, there were no shootouts or deaths during the simultaneous searches of Frank Lucas's properties. However, the 2,000 kilograms of drugs, which had not yet been distributed or packaged, were seized in full. The next step for Roberts was to go with his team directly to the church where Frank Lucas and his family were attending a service to arrest him and take him straight to federal prison with no resistance. To mitigate his sentence, Frank Lucas agreed to cooperate with the law, represented by his adversary Richie Roberts, in exchange for a 70-year prison term. He disclosed numerous corrupt police officers who had been paid to turn a blind eye to his drug empire. From his testimony, 52 out of 70 anti-drug police officers in New Jersey were arrested and prosecuted. Many of Frank Lucas's assets obtained through drug trafficking were seized, including bank accounts in the Cayman Islands, totaling $52 million. Thanks to this cooperation, Lucas's prison sentence was reduced from 70 years to 15 years, and he was placed in the Federal Witness Protection Program. In 1981, Frank Lucas was released, but falling back into old habits, was tempted by drugs again. In 1984, he was caught transporting 13 kilograms of cocaine and was sentenced to an additional 7 years in prison. By 1991, Frank Lucas was released once more. After the Frank Lucas case, Richie Roberts continued to serve in the anti-drug unit for another 7 years before transitioning to a career as a lawyer. Notably, his first client was Frank Lucas. Thanks to his eloquence, Roberts demonstrated the importance of Frank Lucas's cooperation in the fight against drugs, securing a reduction in his client's sentence from 70 years to 15 years, and ensuring he received witness protection as mentioned. During Frank Lucas's imprisonment, Richie Roberts continued to support and provide financial assistance to raise Lucas's son, Raymond Lucas, who later became a talented hip-hop artist. When Frank Lucas was released, Richie Roberts was there to pick him up, and today, these former adversaries remain close friends. Despite not returning to prison after 1991, Frank Lucas encountered legal trouble again in 2012 for falsely claiming $17,000 in disability benefits. Lucas was sentenced to 5 years of probation due to his advanced age and health issues. His life became the inspiration for the famous film American Gangster, in which American actor Denzel Washington portrayed the drug lord Lucas. Lucas even advised Washington on acting, though he later admitted that the film's script contained more dramatic elements than his real-life story. However, the end of the Blue Magic Empire was not the end, but rather a transition to another criminal empire. While Lucas was serving his sentence, the focus of the drug empire shifted from the Golden Triangle in Myanmar to the Golden Crescent in Afghanistan, with new drug lords like Pablo Escobar and others emerging. A new cycle of criminal activity began. On May 30th, 2018, Frank Lucas passed away at his home, surrounded by family. His ending might be considered relatively gentle compared to the turmoil he caused throughout his life. What do you think of this story? Share your thoughts below so everyone can know. Don't forget to like and subscribe to support the channel. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.